Plot requires conflict. But how do you generate conflict? Today, I thought it might be fun to take a look at the 4 types of antagonists that you can use to generate conflict, be that in a novel or in a campaign. Welcome to another episode of Just in Time Worlds with your host, Marie Mullaney. So first, I'm not going to cover each antagonist type in detail. I'm going to cover them in broad strokes, and if you want me to delve into any specific antagonist type, let me know in the comments below. Okay, let's get cracking. The most typical form of antagonist is that of the villain. This is somebody like Lady Macbeth from Macbeth, Big Brother from 1984, Sauron from Lord of the Rings, Prince Regal from the Farseer trilogy, Voldemort from Harry Potter. Typically, your villain is on the evil side and they should be defeated at the end of the story. Villains can be great fun to play with. They can provide you with an external agency to force interaction with your antagonist. They can provide bad things that happen to your antagonist. They can provide something for your antagonist to chase after, a centerpiece of the plot that the antagonist is chasing. This is especially true if your villain has got this masterful plot that is slowly unfolding over the course of your story, and where your hero interacts with it, it becomes more and more clear to your reader what's going on. The same applies to campaigns. A great villain can make for a great campaign. As the player characters interact with a villain's plot, they become aware of more and more nuances and plot points, and it unfolds before them. There's a couple of things to avoid with using a villain. The first is, in my opinion, your villain shouldn't be so sympathetic that people root for him. This is especially true if your heroic characters are not super sympathetic. So if your heroic characters are not pure good guy Paladin type characters and your villain is very sympathetic, you can fall into a trap where your readers are going to feel very dissatisfied at the end, and they're going, I didn't like that. I didn't like the villain losing. I wanted the villain to win. So be careful of making a villain overly sympathetic, especially with not very sympathetic heroic characters. The second trap that you can fall into with a villain is evil. Now, I'm not saying you can't have villains that are evil for the sake of evil. There are villains who just want to see the world burn. If that is your only villain type, then there's very little conflict. Basically, what happens is your protagonists oppose your antagonist, they defeat him, and that's the end of the story. It's a very linear progression. So having some complexity and some nuance in your villains is a very good plan. And that's why a lot of villains, especially in modern fantasy, tend to be more complex than just the evil, or it is the darkness that rises in the east, that sits atop the tower and sweeps across the land with its evil eye. Which is not to say that Sauron is necessarily a single-dimensional evil villain. Personally, if I was to choose between Saruman as the villain and Sauron as the villain, I prefer Saruman. Because Saruman has got motivations that I can get behind. I understand ambition. I understand how ambition can drive you to fall. I understand how despair in the face of overwhelming evil can drive you to fall. And I think those two in combination make for a very dangerous cocktail, which I completely understand why Saruman fell. Sauron is an immortal evil. I'm never going to be an immortal evil. It's like the others in Game of Thrones. I don't understand them as a villain beyond they are an external evil force. And as such, everybody needs to oppose them. The fact that everybody in Game of Thrones doesn't oppose them brings me to the second kind of antagonist, the conflict creator or opposing forces characters. In Pride and Prejudice, Mr. Darcy is this kind of character. And yes, I absolutely have read Pride and Prejudice, and no, I am not ashamed of it. In Pride and Prejudice, Mr. Darcy is, for the most part, at loggerheads with Elizabeth Bennet. And because of this, his attitude towards her is the primary creation of conflict in the books. This opposing force is when you have two characters, neither of them are necessarily good characters or evil characters, and they can even both be narrating characters or protagonists. But they oppose each other. Their goals oppose each other. And because their goals oppose each other, this creates conflict. In Game of Thrones, it is all pretty much like that. Now, I have seen a lot of blog posts and videos and so on that refer to people like Tywin Lannister or Cersei Lannister as villains. And I don't buy that. They're not all good characters, but they're not fundamentally villains. They don't reason the way that Jon wants them to reason, or that Dany wants them to reason, or that Ned wants them to reason. And they've made some terrible choices, and they do some terrible things, but that doesn't make them villainous in their own story. For me, they are conflict-creating characters. The books open with Ned Stark executing a guy. Now you can argue that the guy deserved to be executed. He had broken his oath. But you could argue that Cersei was defending herself when she blew up Baelor's Sept. The church was about to declare her a heretic. Of course she was going to defend herself. Now, she defended herself with extreme vigor, resulting in multiple deaths, and you could argue that that defense was completely out of proportion and included taking the lives of thousands of innocents, and you could hold her to account for that. But her actions are understandable. They do create conflict with the rest of the cast of characters, however. And that is the key part of the conflict-creating character. The conflict-creating character opposes the rest of the cast and by their goals creates the conflict necessary to move the plot forward. But sometimes you don't want to have your characters going up directly against another character. You can have conflict created by the environment itself. Anne McCaffrey uses this to great effect in Dragon's Dawn, which is the prequel book of Pern. So these colonists from Earth land on Pern. They land on Pern, they set up a colony, they have some of the normal experiences that you would expect of people setting up a colony, but nothing extreme, nothing out of the ordinary. Then the red star comes, and it comes through Pern's Oort cloud, and with it, it carries these things called threads. Now, threads fall from the red star, and they give birth to a life cycle where they create these silvery worms that literally eat all biomass. And they will keep eating all biomass until they have stripped the place bare. The only thing that kills them is fire. This creates a situation that the colonists now have to deal with, and they are completely unprepared for this. They have no aerial defenses. While their houses are set up to counter these things, their gardens aren't covered, so they lose their crops. Then the situation is exacerbated due to the fact that the red planet's proximity reactivates the volcano, the dead volcano where they'd built their first settlement. So now they have to relocate the bulk of their people to the northern continent to where there's a solid rock shelf and where there's extensive cave complexes. So they have to relocate and they have to somehow come up with a defense against these creatures. And the defense that they come up with is a sufficiently advanced technology defense where a genetic scientist takes the native life form and creates from them rideable dragons. And if you want to know more about using science as the basis for your magic, check out my video in the info cards. So you can use that kind of external event that doesn't have a villain per se to create conflict. The asteroid from Armageddon, the movie, does the same thing. Jaws does the same thing in the movie Jaws. This is a great mechanic if you don't want to have your heroes struggle against a specific person that they have to bring down. So the overcome for your heroes in this case is to overcome a natural event. The problem with this is sometimes the solution can be too simple. So if you're going to use this kind of event, it needs to have spectacular consequences, the asteroid, the thread, etc., and it needs to be hard to overcome. Honestly, Jaws, you could just have moved away from the ocean. I mean, hashtag didn't need to kill the shark. So those three you can all use in a role-playing campaign as well. The last one that you can use to create conflict is really hard to pull off in a role-playing campaign because it needs the cooperation of your players, and that is internal conflict. Internal conflict is when the character needs to make a decision that is against their moral code or against their code of honor or somehow disturbs them. The greatest example of this in modern fantasy that I've seen is Zuko from The Last Avatar. Zuko's battle against being a good person versus obeying his father is so beautifully done. His whole character arc, this fight, this internal conflict that it causes is just... Another good example of this kind of conflict is Frodo. Frodo spends the whole journey of The Lord of the Rings fighting to not fall to the ring. That internal battle of Frodo's creates a lot of the conflict in Lord of the Rings, and that is when he needs to have an external assist from Gollum to destroy the ring, because he actually fails the internal conflict. He fails to overcome it. I use internal conflict in The Hidden Blade. The primary conflict is with Louis, the main character, who is an assassin and who is very familiar with killing people, being commanded to kill an entire family, including a child. And to him, this conflict is a driving moment of crisis. If you think The Hidden Blade sounds interesting, you can support my channel by checking it out on Kindle Unlimited or buying it through Amazon. It is also available as an audiobook. Okay, that's enough of Hidden Blade. Let's move on to Jaime Lannister. Jaime Lannister's internal conflict is one of the highlights for me in Game of Thrones. His journey is one again of a man who has a bad family, and that journey of him becoming a better man is so well done, right up until the final season where he throws away the entire character development arc and goes back to Cersei, and I can't even. Okay. Anyway, internal conflict can be an amazing generator of conflict. If well done, it can suck your reader into the head of the character and really get them to explore this moral quandary that your character is faced with. But in order to do so, you need to establish that your character has some kind of set of morals. You need to set up the internal conflict, and then you need to have the character overcome it in some fashion. Now, as you can see, really excellent books have got multiple forms of conflict. You can have internal conflict, you can have external conflict via a villain, an event, or an opposing force. And if you manage to combine it, you can put real pressure on your characters that face them with multiple incoming issues that all have to be solved in the overcome. If you do use multiple sources of conflict, bear this in mind though. Every one of those conflicts have to be overcome in the end. Otherwise, you're going to leave your readers or your players feeling unfulfilled and unsatisfied. And that is my take on how to do antagonists and how to create conflict in fantasy worlds. I hope that you've enjoyed this episode of Just in Time Worlds. Please do hit the thumbs up button if you did. It really does help with the algorithm. And I will see you soon for another episode of Just in Time Worlds.